Circumstances do not make the man, they reveal him to himself. James Allen, think deeply about those words for a moment. Most people spend their lives believing that their circumstances are the source of their suffering, their limitations, and their failures. They believe that if only the world would change, then they could finally become confident. If only money appeared, then they could finally feel secure. If only opportunities arrived, then they could finally act boldly. But what if the circumstances you face are not defining you at all? What if they are simply revealing the beliefs you have accepted about yourself? What if the greatest transformation begins the moment you stop reacting to appearances and start assuming a different identity within? Today, I want to invite you into a powerful state of being, a state that few people ever truly understand, a state where you become silent, steady, and unmoved by temporary appearances, a state where you act as if you have nothing to lose. Most people hear those words and immediately think of recklessness. They imagine someone throwing caution to the wind or making impulsive decisions. But that is not what this means. To act as if you have nothing to lose is not to become careless. It is to become free. It is to stop living under the constant pressure of fear. It is to stop allowing the opinions of others, the memories of past failures, and the uncertainty of tomorrow to control your present state of consciousness. Look closely at your life. How many opportunities have you avoided because you feared rejection? How many dreams have you delayed because you feared failure? How many times have you remained silent when your heart wanted to speak because you feared judgment? Fear has a remarkable way of disguising itself as logic. It whispers that it is protecting you. It tells you to wait until conditions are perfect. It advises caution while secretly keeping you trapped exactly where you are. The truth is that fear feeds on attachment. You fear losing what you believe is essential to your survival. You fear losing approval because you have attached your identity to the opinions of others. You fear losing money because you have attached your security to numbers. You fear losing relationships because you have attached your worth to another person's presence. You fear losing opportunities because you have attached your future to external circumstances. But something extraordinary happens when you begin withdrawing these attachments. You start discovering a deeper source of power within yourself. You realize that your value was never dependent upon external validation. You realize that your peace was never dependent upon perfect circumstances. You realize that your future was never dependent upon current appearances. The person who acts as if they have nothing to lose walks differently through life. They are not desperate. They are not constantly seeking reassurance. They are not begging the world to confirm their worth. They have already accepted their worth internally. They have already made peace with themselves. Because of this, their actions carry a certain energy. Their words have conviction. Their presence feels calm. Their decisions are not contaminated by fear. Imagine standing at the edge of a new possibility. Perhaps it is a new career, a new business, a new relationship, a new version of yourself. Most people approach that edge carrying invisible chains. They carry memories of previous disappointments. They carry doubts about their abilities. They carry endless questions about what could go wrong. Now imagine approaching that same possibility with complete inner freedom. Imagine saying to yourself, I am no longer negotiating with fear. I am no longer asking permission from my past. I am no longer waiting for certainty before I move forward. Can you feel the difference? The external situation has not changed. The opportunity remains the same. Yet everything feels different because your state of consciousness has changed. This is why silence becomes so important. The world is filled with noise, endless opinions, endless predictions, endless warnings, endless distractions. Most people absorb these voices without realizing it. They allow the fears of others to become their own fears. They allow the limitations of others to become their own limitations. But the individual who is learning to master themselves begins cultivating inner silence. Not merely the absence of words, but the absence of mental chaos. They stop arguing with reality. They stop obsessing over what they cannot control. They stop replaying old stories that no longer serve them. In that silence, something remarkable emerges. They begin hearing a different voice, a quieter voice, a wiser voice, a voice that does not speak through panic or anxiety, a voice that speaks through certainty. That voice reminds them that they are more powerful than they have been taught to believe. It reminds them that imagination is not fantasy, but a creative force. It reminds them that every transformation begins within before it becomes visible without. Most people attempt to change their lives by forcing external action while maintaining the same internal identity. They want new results while continuing to think the same thoughts, feel the same emotions, and assume the same limitations. But lasting transformation requires something deeper. It requires becoming internally familiar with the person you desire to be before the world provides evidence. This is where many people turn back. They become impatient. They demand immediate proof. They look at current circumstances and conclude that nothing is changing. Yet the deepest changes are often invisible at first. A seed beneath the soil appears inactive long before it breaks through the surface. The transformation is happening where no one can see it. The same is true for you. Every time you choose faith over fear, something changes. Every time you remain silent instead of reacting emotionally, something changes. Every time you act from confidence rather than insecurity, something changes. Every time you refuse to let appearances dictate your state of mind, something changes. The world may not immediately recognize these shifts. Other people may not notice them, but your consciousness notices. Your identity notices. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin becoming someone new. And as this new version of yourself emerges, you start discovering a hidden truth that most people never realize. A truth so liberating that it changes the way you approach every challenge, every opportunity, and every dream. It is the understanding that the greatest risk in life is not failure at all. And once you fully grasp why, everything about the way you move through this world begins to transform. The moment you begin to understand that the greatest risk is not failure, a strange sense of freedom starts to enter your life. For years, perhaps even for decades, you may have believed that failure was the enemy. You may have spent enormous amounts of energy trying to avoid mistakes, avoid embarrassment, avoid disappointment, and avoid uncertainty. Yet, if you look honestly at the lives of those who transformed themselves, you will discover that their power did not come from avoiding failure. Their power came from no longer being controlled by it. Think about how much of human behavior is driven by fear of loss. People stay in situations that no longer serve them because they fear losing familiarity. They remain silent when they should speak because they fear losing approval. They settle for less than they desire because they fear losing the little they already have. And in trying so desperately to avoid loss, they unknowingly lose the very thing that makes life extraordinary, their freedom to become. When you act as if you have nothing to lose, you are not saying that nothing matters. You are saying that your identity is no longer dependent on outcomes. You are saying that whether circumstances move quickly or slowly, whether others support you or doubt you, whether temporary victories appear or disappear, you remain grounded in who you have chosen to be. This is a profound shift because most people allow the outer world to dictate their inner state. If things go well, they feel confident. If things go badly, they feel defeated. Their emotions rise and fall with circumstances. Their sense of self changes from day to day. They are constantly reacting. But the individual who is awakening to their deeper power begins reversing this process. Instead of allowing circumstances to create their state of mind, they allow their state of mind to influence the way they experience circumstances. At first, this may sound simple, but it requires tremendous discipline. It requires refusing to worship appearances. It requires refusing to give temporary situations permanent authority over your identity. Imagine waking up every morning already convinced that your future is unfolding in your favor. Not because you can see every detail, not because you possess guarantees, but because you have decided that your inner state will not be dictated by external evidence. Most people wait for evidence before they believe. The transformed person believes first. This does not mean blind optimism. It means conscious selection. It means deliberately choosing which assumptions deserve your attention. It means understanding that every great achievement existed as an unseen possibility long before it became visible reality. Consider the artist before the masterpiece is painted. Consider the architect before the building is constructed. Consider the inventor before the breakthrough occurs. The outer creation always follows an inner vision. The visible follows the invisible. Yet here is where many people become trapped. They begin imagining a better future, but they continue speaking as the person they used to be. They continue reacting as the person they used to be. They continue identifying with old limitations. Transformation cannot thrive in a divided mind. If one part of you imagines abundance, while another part constantly rehearses scarcity, conflict is created. If one part imagines confidence, while another part constantly repeats stories of inadequacy, conflict is created. If one part imagines success, while another part remains emotionally committed to failure, conflict is created. Your task is not to force reality. Your task is to become internally consistent. This is where silence becomes a sacred practice. When you stop announcing every goal, defending every dream, and explaining every step of your journey, something powerful happens. Your energy begins moving inward rather than outward. Instead of seeking validation, you begin cultivating conviction. Many people talk endlessly about what they are going to do. They describe their plans, they seek approval, they ask for permission, they collect opinions. Then they wonder why their momentum disappears. The reason is simple. They are spending energy discussing transformation instead of embodying it. There is tremendous power in quiet certainty. A mountain does not announce its strength. The sunrise does not ask for recognition. The ocean does not seek approval before expressing its nature. Likewise, there comes a point where you stop trying to convince others of your potential. You stop arguing with doubters. You stop fighting to be understood. You simply become. This quiet confidence is often misunderstood. People may assume you have become detached. They may assume you have become indifferent. But what has actually happened is that your dependence on external confirmation has begun dissolving. You are learning to trust something deeper. You are learning to trust the unseen movement of life. You are learning to trust the wisdom that emerges when fear no longer dominates your decisions. And fear loses much of its power when you truly examine it. Ask yourself honestly, how many of your greatest fears ever happened exactly as you imagined? How many sleepless nights were spent worrying about events that never occurred? How many opportunities were abandoned because of imaginary disasters that existed only in the mind? Fear often presents itself as certainty, but it is usually speculation wearing a convincing disguise. The mind creates images of failure and treats them as facts. It creates stories of rejection and treats them as reality. It creates predictions of defeat and behaves as though the future has already been written. But the future has not been written. Every moment contains possibilities beyond your current perception. Every day holds opportunities that cannot yet be seen. Every challenge carries hidden pathways that reveal themselves only after movement begins. This is why courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is the decision to move beyond fear's authority. And once you begin moving from this place, another transformation starts occurring. You become less attached to immediate results and more committed to the person you are becoming. You realize that every circumstance is training your consciousness. Every obstacle is revealing hidden beliefs. Every delay is testing whether your faith depends upon visible proof. Gradually, you stop measuring progress solely by external achievement. You begin noticing something far more valuable. You notice that situations which once shattered your confidence no longer affect you the same way. You notice that criticism loses its sting. You notice that uncertainty feels less threatening. You notice that peace is becoming your natural state rather than a rare exception. And it is here, in this growing inner stability, that one of the most powerful secrets of transformation begins to reveal itself. A secret about identity, imagination, and the hidden relationship between the version of yourself you currently know and the extraordinary version that is waiting to emerge. That discovery changes everything, because it forces you to confront a question most people spend their entire lives avoiding. There comes a moment in every genuine transformation when you are faced with a question that cannot be avoided forever. It is not a question about money, relationships, success, status, or achievements. It is a question about identity. Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when circumstances offer no encouragement? Who are you when there is no applause, no recognition, and no immediate evidence that your efforts are producing results? Most people spend their lives trying to change their conditions without changing their identity. They want a different future while remaining psychologically attached to the person they have always been. They imagine new possibilities during moments of inspiration, but when challenges appear, they immediately return to familiar patterns of thought. The reason this happens is because the mind naturally seeks what feels familiar, even when what feels familiar is limiting. A person may desire abundance, but if struggle feels familiar, they unconsciously return to thoughts of lack. A person may desire confidence, but if insecurity feels familiar, they unconsciously return to self-doubt. A person may desire freedom, but if fear feels familiar, they unconsciously return to hesitation. This is why inner transformation requires more than temporary motivation. Motivation can inspire action for a day. A new identity can change an entire life. When you begin acting as if you have nothing to lose, you are actually beginning a process of identity reconstruction. You are slowly withdrawing energy from the version of yourself that was built upon fear. You are no longer feeding the old stories. You are no longer strengthening the old assumptions. You are no longer allowing yesterday's limitations to define tomorrow's possibilities. Imagine carrying a heavy suitcase for years without realizing how much it weighs. At first, it seems normal. You adapt to it. You accept it as part of life. But then one day you set it down. Suddenly, you realize how much energy was being consumed by something you no longer needed. This is exactly what happens when you release limiting identities. You begin noticing how much energy was being drained by constant worry, how much energy was being consumed by seeking approval, how much energy was being lost through comparison, how much energy was being sacrificed to fears that never deserved such authority. And as that energy becomes available again, something beautiful begins emerging from within. Your imagination starts expanding, your vision starts growing, your sense of possibility starts deepening. For perhaps the first time, you begin seeing yourself not as a victim of circumstances, but as a participant in creation. Most people underestimate the power of imagination because they misunderstand its purpose. They treat imagination as entertainment. They treat it as fantasy. They treat it as an escape from reality. But imagination is far more than that. Every achievement that exists in the physical world existed first in someone's imagination. Every invention, every masterpiece, every movement, every transformation. The unseen always precedes the seen. The inner always precedes the outer. The invisible blueprint always comes before visible construction. This is why your inner conversations matter so much. Throughout the day, you are constantly speaking to yourself. You are constantly interpreting events. You are constantly assigning meaning to experiences. These internal dialogues become the foundation of your identity. If your inner conversations are filled with doubt, your world begins reflecting doubt. If your inner conversations are filled with limitation, your world begins reflecting limitation. If your inner conversations are filled with possibility, courage, and certainty, your world gradually begins reflecting those qualities as well. This is not because reality magically changes overnight. It is because your perception changes first, and perception influences action. Action influences results. Results reinforce identity. The cycle continues. That is why the person who has truly embraced the mindset of having nothing to lose does not spend every moment analyzing circumstances. They spend their energy cultivating inner alignment. They become extremely selective about what they allow into their consciousness. They understand that every thought is planting seeds. Every assumption is creating momentum. Every emotional state is shaping future experiences. This understanding brings tremendous responsibility, but it also brings tremendous freedom. Because if your inner world has helped create your current experience, then your inner world can also participate in creating a new one. And here is where silence reveals another gift. Silence allows you to observe yourself. Most people are so busy reacting that they never truly observe their own patterns. They never notice how often they assume the worst. They never notice how frequently they rehearse failure. They never notice how quickly they surrender their peace to external events. But when you become still, you begin seeing these patterns clearly, not with judgment, not with self condemnation, but with awareness. Awareness is transformative because you cannot change what you refuse to see. Once a limiting belief becomes visible, it begins losing its power. Once an unconscious habit becomes conscious, it becomes easier to release. Once a false identity is exposed, it becomes harder to continue believing it. Slowly, the old version of yourself starts dissolving, not through force, not through struggle, but through understanding. The masks begin falling away, the fears begin weakening, the doubts begin losing credibility, and underneath it all, you discover something that was present the entire time. A deeper self, a wiser self, a self that was never defined by circumstances, a self that was never diminished by temporary failures, a self that was never dependent upon the approval of others. This discovery changes the way you move through life. You stop approaching opportunities from a place of need. You stop chasing validation. You stop begging circumstances to cooperate before allowing yourself to feel confident. Instead, confidence becomes an internal decision. Peace becomes an internal decision. Faith becomes an internal decision. And because these qualities originate within, the external world can no longer control them so easily. Yet there remains one final lesson, perhaps the most important lesson of all. Because even after a person discovers their deeper identity, even after they learn the power of silence, imagination, and inner certainty, there is still a final threshold they must cross. It is the threshold where knowledge becomes embodiment, where understanding becomes living experience, where faith is no longer something you practice occasionally, but something you become. And once that threshold is crossed, the entire relationship between consciousness, reality, and personal transformation is never the same again. Man is made by his belief. As he believes, so he is. Bhagavad Gita. Now we arrive at the final threshold, the place where many people gather knowledge, but few people choose to live it. This is the point where understanding must become embodiment. It is one thing to hear that your inner world matters. It is another thing entirely to live each day from that truth. It is one thing to speak about faith when circumstances are favorable. It is another thing to remain faithful when appearances suggest the opposite. The greatest transformations do not happen when everything is easy. They happen when a person decides that their inner state will no longer be a prisoner of external conditions. They happen when someone finally understands that the power they have been searching for has never been outside of them. For most of life, people are taught to react. Something happens and they respond emotionally. Someone criticizes them and they lose confidence. A setback appears and they lose hope. A delay occurs and they assume failure. Their emotional world becomes a mirror of circumstances. But the awakened individual begins living differently. They understand that circumstances are temporary visitors. They come, they stay for a while, and then they leave. Nothing in the visible world remains unchanged forever. The storm passes. The night ends. The season changes. The challenge that feels permanent today eventually becomes a memory. When you truly understand this, you stop giving temporary appearances permanent meaning. A difficult moment is no longer interpreted as proof that your future is doomed. A delay is no longer interpreted as evidence that your desire will never arrive. A setback is no longer interpreted as a final verdict on your potential. Instead, you begin seeing life through a wider lens. You begin recognizing that reality often rearranges itself in ways the rational mind could never predict. How many blessings have entered your life through doors you never expected? How many valuable lessons emerged from situations you once resisted? How many opportunities appeared after periods that seemed confusing or uncertain? Life has always been moving in ways larger than your immediate perception. The problem is that fear narrows vision. Fear convinces you that the present moment is the entire story. Faith allows you to recognize that the story is still unfolding. This is why acting as if you have nothing to lose is so powerful. When fear no longer dominates your consciousness, you become available to possibilities that were previously hidden from you. You begin taking actions that your old identity would never have attempted. You begin speaking with greater certainty. You begin carrying yourself with greater confidence. You begin expecting favorable outcomes rather than preparing for disappointment. And gradually, the outer world starts reflecting these inner shifts. Not because the universe suddenly decided to reward you, but because your consciousness changed, your assumptions, your decisions changed, your energy changed. And when these things change consistently, your experience inevitably begins changing as well. The person you become determines the life you experience. This is one of the deepest truths you can ever understand. Most people focus entirely on changing circumstances. Very few focus on becoming the person for whom those circumstances feel natural. A person who constantly feels unworthy will struggle to sustain success. A person who constantly feels powerless will struggle to maintain confidence. A person who constantly feels afraid will struggle to experience freedom. The outer experience cannot permanently exceed the inner identity. Therefore, your greatest work is not forcing results. Your greatest work is becoming the version of yourself who naturally thinks differently, naturally feels differently, naturally expects differently, naturally moves through life with a different level of awareness. This process does not require perfection. It requires persistence. There will be days when old fears attempt to return. There will be moments when doubt whispers familiar stories. There will be situations that tempt you to react from your former identity. But each time you choose awareness over habit, you strengthen your transformation. Each time you choose faith over fear, you strengthen your transformation. Each time you choose inner certainty over external appearances, you strengthen your transformation. Eventually, what once required effort becomes natural. The new identity becomes familiar. The new assumptions become normal. The new state of consciousness becomes your home. And that is when life begins feeling different. Not because every challenge disappears, not because every desire arrives instantly, but because you are no longer the same person who once viewed challenges and desires through the lens of fear. You have become steadier, calmer, more deliberate, more powerful, more aware. You no longer chase validation because you have discovered value within yourself. You no longer depend on circumstances for confidence because confidence has become part of your nature. You no longer allow temporary appearances to define permanent truths. Most importantly, you no longer live as someone who is afraid of losing because you have realized something extraordinary. The real treasure was never outside of you. The real treasure was your consciousness, your awareness, your imagination, your faith, your ability to choose your state regardless of circumstances. These are things no setback can take from you, no criticism can remove from you, no temporary failure can destroy. And when you truly understand this, an incredible freedom enters your life. You stop shrinking, you stop hesitating, you stop postponing your future. You stop asking the world for permission to become who you were meant to be. You move forward with quiet certainty. You trust the unseen process. You remain faithful to your vision. You act boldly when action is required. You remain silent when silence is wiser. And through it all, you carry a profound inner knowing. A knowing that your future is not determined by present appearances. A knowing that your identity is greater than any temporary circumstance. A knowing that the power you seek has been within you all along. So walk forward without fear. Speak less and believe more. React less and trust more. Doubt less and imagine more. Release the need to control every outcome. Release the need for constant reassurance. Release the old identity that was built upon fear and limitation. Become still. Become certain. Become the person you have already seen in your highest vision. And then live from that state every day. For the moment you truly become that person within, the world eventually has no choice but to reflect it without. And that is the freedom, the power, and the transformation that belongs to the one who is silent, steadfast, and acts as if they